Bill Hartley's life ran on quiet routines. At 63, he'd earned the right to enjoy silence. Mornings began with the slow creak of his porch chair, a steaming mug of black coffee, and the sound of sprinklers ticking like distant metronomes down the road. His property sat just outside the neat, rule-loving world of Lakewood Meadows, an HOA development where every mailbox matched, every lawn had a regulation height, and every neighbor smiled like they practiced it. Bill's land, though, was a stubborn holdout from another time. 27 acres of mixed pasture and oak trees, a barn older than most residents, and a gravel driveway that didn't care what the HOA handbook said about aesthetic uniformity. He'd grown up here, back when the town was mostly farmland and gravel roads. His father had been the kind of man who measured a day's success by the number of fence posts set straight and the number of times coffee was refilled without fuss. When his father passed, the land became more than dirt. It was history, the kind you could smell in the rain and hear in the wind through the barn slats. Bill, a retired land surveyor, understood boundaries in a way most people didn't. He could read a deed like other men read a novel. Every line of legal description meant something. Every marker told a story. So when he came back home, his goal was simple. Fix the barn, clean the old tools, and enjoy peace. The neighbors were polite enough at first. They waved, sometimes hesitantly, from their SUVs as they drove past his unpaved drive. The HOA houses glittered with identical porch lights, identical flower beds, and identical live, laugh, love plaques. Bill didn't mind their sameness. He just didn't want to be part of it. He'd tell people, "I spent 30 years drawing lines for a living. I like mine clear." That piece lasted almost a year. Then, one Tuesday morning, while replacing a fence post near the north edge of his land, Bill noticed something strange. A row of small orange survey flags fluttered along the ditch line. Too new, too neat. His surveyor's eye caught it instantly. They weren't marking the boundary. They were inside it by about 4 feet. He knelt, squinted, and muttered, "Somebody's been playing surveyor again." The flags stretched down the hill toward the subdivision. He thought little of it at first. Maybe the county was running utilities. Maybe some new contractor couldn't read a plat. He'd seen that before. Bureaucratic nonsense always found a way to leak past the fence. Still, something about those flags felt off, like a whisper that didn't belong in your own living room. 3 days later, a white envelope appeared in his mailbox. Thick paper, printed logo, Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association. He opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a notice with language so polished it squeaked. "Dear resident, you are receiving this notice as a friendly reminder to maintain compliance with the Lakewood Meadows Community Appearance Standards. Your property currently exhibits excessive overgrowth and noncompliance with community visual harmony requirements. A corrective fine of $350 has been assessed. Please remit within 30 days to maintain good standing with the community. Thank you for helping keep Lakewood Meadows beautiful." Bill read it twice, then once more slower, just to be sure he hadn't missed the punchline. He laughed so hard coffee nearly came out his nose. "Good standing with the community?" he said aloud. "Lady, I'm not even in your community." He set the letter aside, figuring it was some clerical error, maybe a mail mix-up. But the next morning, he found another envelope, this one stamped urgent. It was identical, except the fine was now $400 and the note ended with, "Failure to comply may result in further enforcement actions." He called the HOA office number listed on the bottom. A cheerful voice answered, "Lakewood Meadows Administrative. How may we help you maintain community standards today?" Bill kept his tone polite. "Ma'am, you sent me a fine for being ugly." A pause. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not a member of your HOA. My land isn't part of Lakewood Meadows." "Well, sir," she chirped. "The board voted to include adjacent parcels in our visual easement policy. It's about maintaining consistency with the community image." Bill chuckled. "You can vote all you want, ma'am. My land's not on your roster. And if it ever is, you'll see me at the next election." He hung up before she could read from whatever script she had ready. That night, over dinner, beans, toast, and a beer, he thought about how strange it was. He'd spent decades arguing with developers and zoning boards, and he knew one thing. Once a committee starts beautifying something that isn't theirs, the real trouble begins. The next morning, he walked the property again. The orange flags had multiplied. There were now fresh white paint lines too, crossing near his pond. He felt that old surveyor's itch, the one that said, "Something here doesn't measure right." 2 days later, a silver SUV pulled up his driveway. Out stepped a woman in a tailored blazer, hair sprayed into submission, heels sinking slightly in the gravel, clipboard in hand, sunglasses the size of coasters. "Good afternoon," she called, marching toward him like she owned the oxygen. "I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Lakewood Meadows HOA. Bill leaned on his shovel. "I guessed as much." She smiled tightly. "We've noticed some ongoing non-compliance issues with your property. It's currently classified as adjacent visual space under the community's expansion plan, and it's been brought to my attention that your fencing and landscaping are below standard." "Below whose standard?" Bill asked. "The community's, of course. We've invested heavily in raising property values for everyone. That includes neighbors who benefit from our visual continuity." Bill raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying my old barn offends your cul-de-sac?" Karen adjusted her clipboard. "It's not about offense, Mr. Hartley. It's about harmony. We're all in this together." He grinned. "Except I'm not." Her smile thinned. "You'll be receiving formal correspondence. Have a nice day." She turned, her heels crunching like punctuation marks across his gravel. By the following week, he'd received 2 more fines, a final notice, and a pamphlet on proper fence aesthetics. The kicker? They'd enclosed a photo of his property, taken by drone, with red circles marking areas of concern. He pinned it to his fridge like a comedy poster. When his friend Rick dropped by for coffee, Bill showed it to him. Rick laughed so hard he nearly fell off the porch. "They're insane," he said. "You should frame it. Call it surveillance of the commons." Bill shook his head. "It's not insanity. It's bureaucracy with too much free time." He figured it would blow over, but the absurdity only grew. Trucks started rolling down the nearby road, big rigs with steel beams and cement mixers. "Community expansion," the sign read. "Future site of Lakewood Promenade, estimated value $12 million. He watched from his porch as construction crews drove stakes deeper onto his land. His land. The one with a deed signed before half these residents were born. He checked the map posted at the site. Sure enough, their expansion zone overlapped his pasture by a good 50 feet. He could have stormed down there, could have shouted, but he'd learned long ago that yelling only made the stupid feel taller. So he just folded his arms, muttered, "Well, this ought to be good," and went back to his coffee. Weeks passed. Bulldozers roared. Dust rose. Where there had been wild grass and fence posts, now there were foundations, drainage pipes, and half-finished walls. The HOA newsletter bragged about the largest retail investment in community history. Bill didn't reply to a single letter. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just watched the parade unfold. The noise, the self-importance, the endless press releases. Every night, he'd stand on his porch and look at the glow of construction lights where his father's old oak once stood. The one they'd cut down without asking. That oak was the last straw. Not because of sentiment, though he missed it, but because it confirmed what he already suspected. The HOA had stopped seeing lines at all. As he stared at the empty space where the tree had stood for generations, he felt the faint hum of irritation settle into something colder, sharper. A kind of quiet decision formed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't swear. He just nodded to himself and said softly, "All right, then, let's see how deep this hole goes." That night, he went inside, poured himself a whiskey, and opened the drawer where that first letter still sat. The paper was slightly curled now, the ink smudged from when he'd laughed over it. He smoothed it flat, looked at the HOA logo, and smiled. "That letter," he said to the empty room, "changed everything." The first thing Bill noticed the next week wasn't the noise. It was the arrogance. A bright blue construction trailer appeared at the edge of his fence line, and within a day, People in reflective vests were pacing his soil with clipboards, coffee cups, and the kind of casual entitlement only bureaucracy could breed. He watched from his porch as one man hammered a stake, then another followed with spray paint, marking a line that curved dangerously into his pasture. It wasn't even subtle. It was as if they assumed he wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. By Friday, the HOA sent another letter, thicker this time, printed on glossy paper. It included an itemized fine escalation schedule, complete with polite threats about additional penalties for non-compliance. The phrasing was the kind of bureaucratic poetry that almost made him laugh. Lines like "your visual footprint negatively impacts community cohesion and failure to respond implies tacit consent to association oversight." Bill read it out loud to his friend Rick when he came by. Rick, who'd been a lawyer long enough to see stupidity in all its forms, choked on his coffee halfway through. "They're fining you for not agreeing to be fined?" "Pretty much," Bill said. "That's what I call efficiency." "Want me to call them?" Bill shook his head. "Not yet. I want to see how far they'll take this." Turned out very far. Within a week, Karen herself, clipboard queen, defender of property values, showed up again. This time she wasn't alone. Two men in polo shirts flanked her, both wearing lanyards that said HOA compliance. Bill noticed their shoes spotless, not a speck of dirt. He figured they'd never stepped off pavement before. "Mr. Hartley," she said, stepping up to the porch, "we've sent several notices. I'm afraid we'll have to escalate." He sipped his coffee. "Ma'am, I think you're confusing me with someone who cares." Karen pursed her lips. "This attitude doesn't help your case." "My case? You're the one trespassing." One of the polo guys cleared his throat, clearly trying to sound official. "Technically, sir, this area falls within our visual domain under Section 3 of the Community Charter." Bill squinted. "Visual domain? Is that the legal term for things you can see but don't own?" Karen ignored the sarcasm. "We're doing this for everyone's benefit, Mr. Hartley. Property values rise when every parcel meets the same standards. Surely you can appreciate that." He nodded. "I can appreciate irony. That's about it." Her tone sharpened. "If you refuse cooperation, the board will be forced to act without your input. Be my guest." That line landed like a dare, and Karen, never one to back down from an audience, even if it was just her two assistants, turned on her heel. "You'll regret this," she said over her shoulder. "Ma'am," he replied, "I regret reading your bylaws. That's enough regret for one lifetime." She drove off, tires spitting gravel, and for a brief moment the road was quiet again. The quiet didn't last. 2 days later, a new sign appeared near his fence. "Future site of Lakewood Promenade." Big bold letters. A fancy rendering of glass storefronts and happy families. Beneath it, smaller text, an HOA development initiative. Bill stared at it for a full minute before laughing so hard he had to sit down. "They're advertising a mall," he said to himself, "on land they don't own." Construction intensified. The hum of machines filled the mornings. The clanging of steel joined the evenings. Dump trucks rumbled through what used to be his father's hayfield. Bill noticed they'd graded a stretch that included the old rock boundary marker, a knee-high boulder his dad had once painted white to mark the line. Now it was gone. He started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, coordinates, old habits resurfacing. The surveyor in him woke up, methodical and calm. He didn't know yet what he'd do with the evidence, but instinct told him to collect it. Bureaucracies loved to pretend mistakes were invisible until you put them on paper. Every week brought a new absurdity. One letter accused him of obstructing community beautification because his tractor created a visual distraction. Another claimed his irregular fencing might pose a hazard to visiting patrons. Patrons, as if people already had the right to walk his land. The final straw came on a Thursday morning. Bill stepped outside to find a cement truck idling where his fence used to be. The driver waved casually, thinking he was part of the project. "Hey man," the guy called. "Where you want the footing line?" Bill blinked. "You're about 50 feet into my property, son." The driver frowned. "Not according to the site plan." He grabbed a clipboard from the cab and flipped it open. See? Lot 28 extension. HOA approved. Bill leaned closer. That's cute. I'm not lot 28. The man shrugged. Hey, I just pour the concrete. And pour it he did 3 hours later. The footing for what looked like a retail wing stretched neatly across Bill's grass. That night, Bill didn't sleep much. He sat at his kitchen table with a whiskey, the glow from the construction lights flickering through his window. He wasn't angry in the way most people imagined. No shouting, no slamming fists. Just a deep, quiet disbelief that bordered on amusement. He called Rick the next morning. They poured concrete on my land. Rick swore under his breath. You're joking. I wish I was. They've lost their minds. Want me to go nuclear? Not yet, Bill said. I'm curious how far arrogance can build before it collapses. That weekend, he walked over to the construction foreman, a big guy with sunburned cheeks and a clipboard of his own. Who authorized this build? Bill asked. HOA board. Karen Wilkins signed off personally. Bill smiled. Of course she did. When the man asked who he was, Bill extended his hand. Just the guy who owns this land. Have a nice day. The foreman laughed like it was a joke. When Bill didn't laugh back, the man's grin faltered. Wait, seriously? Dead serious. The foreman rubbed his neck. We'll get back to you on that. By Tuesday, the construction continued as if nothing had happened. Bill realized then what he was up against. Not malice, just incompetence in a suit. An incompetence he knew was harder to fight than evil. Evil you could expose. Stupidity just kept filing paperwork. That week, he started getting visits from residents curious about the project. One woman from down the road stopped by while he was fixing his gate. You must be thrilled, she said cheerfully. That new promenade's going to raise everyone's property value. Bill smirked. You mean mine? Since it's being built on my land. She laughed awkwardly. Oh, you're funny. That's the spirit. Not joking, he said. Her smile froze. Then she scurried off muttering something about calling the board. By the end of the month, the half-built mall loomed like a bad metaphor. Glass windows reflected the sun over what used to be open field. The HOA newsletter bragged about record-breaking community expansion and even included a quote from Karen. Lakewood Meadows is proud to pioneer smart growth for all. Bill read that line 3 times, then folded the newsletter neatly and set it beside the original fine notice. 2 artifacts of arrogance. His patience was starting to thin. He kept quiet, polite, amused. But when he saw bulldozers tearing through the spot where his dad's old oak had stood, the one that had shaded generations of Hartleys, something inside him clicked. Not rage exactly, more like a light turning on in a dark room. That night, over another glass of whiskey, he opened his filing cabinet. Dust puffed up like memory. Inside were decades of documents, plats, deeds, boundary surveys. His father had kept everything. Bill ran his hand along the folders, stopping at one labeled 1974, original title. He smiled, slow and calm. All right, Karen, he murmured. Let's see how your empire holds up against math and ink. Outside, the construction lights glowed bright over the half-finished mall. From his porch, it looked almost beautiful in a ridiculous way, millions of dollars standing proudly on a mistake. He leaned back, listening to the faint whir of distant generators, and whispered, I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Bill wasn't the kind of man who believed in revenge for its own sake. He'd seen too many people waste years trying to outshout bureaucracy. What he believed in was precision, the satisfaction of drawing a perfect boundary and watching chaos fall neatly on the other side of it. So when he opened that cabinet and pulled out the original title documents for the Hartley land, he wasn't angry. He was clinical, calm. It was like tightening a loose bolt on an old fence. One twist at a time until it held steady again. He laid the papers out on the kitchen table, flattening their edges with a surveyor's care. The document was yellowed and crisp, dated 1974, signed by his father and sealed with the county clerk's emblem. The kind they didn't even use anymore. The legal description was familiar to him. A a string of coordinates and bearings that mapped his entire childhood. He traced them with his finger, silently reciting, "Commencing at the northwest corner of Section 12. It was all still valid. That much he knew before he even checked the digital record. But the satisfaction came from verifying it, seeing that his family's name still sat on that property line like bedrock. The HOA's zoning expansion? Filed decades later under a different plat system entirely. They'd built on a boundary they didn't own. Assuming that because the farmland wasn't fenced tight and didn't have a fancy street address, it was up for grabs. It wasn't. It never had been. The next morning, Bill called Rick, his old friend who'd turned land law into an art form. Rick still practiced from a small office above a hardware store downtown, where the carpet smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee grounds. "Rick," Bill said, sliding the papers across the desk. "You ever seen someone build a mall on the wrong man's dirt?" Rick adjusted his glasses. "You're serious?" "Serious as a survey marker." Rick scanned the documents, whistling low. "They didn't even check the title chain. This is ironclad. They've built $12 million of real estate on your land." Bill leaned back, deadpan. "Free construction. Not bad." "Huh." Rick chuckled. "You're enjoying this too much. I'm enjoying the irony. There's a difference." Rick tapped the deed. "So what's the play? You could sue, stop the project, demand damages." "No," Bill interrupted. "Let them finish. Let every nail go in, every ribbon get tied. I want it nice and shiny before I claim it." Rick stared at him. "You're evil. I'm efficient." They filed the necessary paperwork quietly. No press, no noise. Rick re-registered the old deed with updated property boundaries, confirming its validity in the current system. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the date, but shrugged when Rick handed over the county seal and tax receipts. "Still good," the clerk said. "Original title owner and heirs have full rights. Nobody ever revoked it." That afternoon, Bill mailed a small check for the last decade's worth of back taxes, a modest sum that would make his claim airtight. He walked out of the post office feeling lighter than he had in years. He wasn't plotting vengeance. He was preparing an education, one Karen Wilkins would never forget. He spent the next few weeks quietly documenting every stage of the mall's completion. He photographed delivery trucks, contractors, and signage bearing the HOA's name. Every proudly managed by Lakewood Meadows Association banner went into his growing folder of evidence. He even attended an HOA meeting for the first time, uninvited, but welcomed when he said he was interested in community progress. The meeting took place in a rented church hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. About 30 residents sat folding chairs in neat rows while Karen stood at the front, commanding attention like she was running for governor. She wore that same blazer, same sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "We're on schedule for grand opening," she announced proudly. "The Lakewood Promenade will redefine our community's economic future. Property values are expected to increase 20%. Scattered applause. Bill sat quietly in the back, sipping the burnt coffee they'd provided, the kind that tasted like boiled anxiety. He raised his hand. "Yes," Karen said, spotting him. "You're Mr. Hartley," he said, "neighboring property owner. Just wanted to say, nice mall you're building." Karen smiled, pleased by the praise. "Why, thank you. We're very proud of it. It'll benefit everyone in the area." "Oh, I bet it will," he said. "Especially me." Her smile faltered, but she moved on to the next agenda item, community parking enforcement. Bill watched, amused, as they debated the color of curb paint for 20 minutes. Bureaucracy at its most self-important. When the meeting ended, Karen approached him. "Mr. Hartley, it's nice to see you participating. Maybe now you understand how we do things." "Oh, I understand perfectly," he said. "I spent 40 years reading zoning maps. I can tell you exactly how you do things." She laughed lightly, misreading his tone. "Then you'll appreciate the detail work that went into planning the promenade. We've had top lawyers and developers on this project. I'm sure they were worth every penny," he said. "I hope they checked the survey." She frowned, confused. but he'd already turned toward the door. Back home, Bill walked his property line at sunset. The mall's half-finished parking lot glowed in the distance, floodlights illuminating freshly paved asphalt. He could smell tar and concrete, the perfume of overconfidence. It made him grin. He wasn't planning to destroy them. He didn't need to. People like Karen destroyed themselves when given enough rope and a microphone. All he had to do was hold the deed and wait for them to build themselves into a corner. Over the next month, the town buzzed about the upcoming grand opening. Bill stayed out of it, spending his mornings fixing the barn and his evenings writing notes for Rick. Specific addresses, parcel IDs, building permit numbers, all the details that would make his case bulletproof. He'd always said that precision was patience wearing a watch, and right now, he had all the time in the world. Neighbors came by with gossip. Karen's getting an award from the Chamber of Commerce, one woman told him, for community leadership. Bill nearly choked on his coffee. Leadership, huh? I'll drink to that. He did quietly at home, watching from his porch as the mall took shape. Windows installed, landscaping finished, banners hung. It was like watching a storm build in slow motion. Predictable, inevitable, and strangely satisfying. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Bill walked over to the far corner of his property, where the boundary met the mall's main entrance. He found a small brass survey marker half buried in dirt. He brushed it clean and smiled. The coordinates stamped into the metal matched his deed exactly. The mall's cornerstone was 3 feet past it on his side. He knelt there for a moment, feeling the weight of history in that little disc of brass. His father had driven that stake himself. It was like a ghostly handshake across time, saying, "They messed with the wrong dirt." He stood, hands in his pockets, and whispered, "They really have no idea." The next morning, he met Rick for breakfast at a diner near the courthouse. Rick brought a manila envelope full of finalized paperwork. "Everything's recorded," Rick said. "Deed reaffirmed, taxes current, boundaries validated. You are, in every legal sense, the owner of the Lakewood Promenade footprint." Bill buttered his toast. "Perfect. Let them cut the ribbon first. I'll collect my rent afterward." Rick shook his head, smiling. "You're enjoying this too much." "Not enough," Bill said. "Not nearly enough." That afternoon, he drove by the mall site and saw Karen giving a news interview beside the new fountain. She was glowing, practically levitating from pride, gesturing at the shops behind her. "This development represents progress," she told the reporter. "It's about community vision." Bill watched from his truck, unseen, and murmured, "You might want glasses for that vision, sweetheart." He went home, filed the last piece of paperwork into his growing binder, and poured himself a drink. He didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. More like a fisherman who's set the hook and knows it's only a matter of time before the line goes tight. He stood at his window, watching the neon construction lights flicker across the horizon, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. The trap was set. The line was drawn. They had no idea what was coming. Grand opening day landed like a parade of self-congratulation. Bright banners stretched across the new parking lot. Music played from rented speakers, and people in pastel shirts passed out glossy flyers about a new chapter for Lakewood Meadows. The air smelled like asphalt and optimism, the kind that made people forget paperwork even existed. Bill parked his truck just far enough away to see everything. He sat for a moment, watching the crowd gather in front of the stage. The morning sun reflected off the mall's fresh glass facade, bouncing sharp light across the asphalt. It looked like progress, loud, shiny, and overconfident. Karen was at the podium basking in attention. The red blazer, the haircut, the microphone. She looked like she was about to announce a presidential campaign. "Today," she said, her voice booming through the speakers, "we celebrate community, hard work, vision. Lakewood Promenade stands as proof that when good people come together." Bill stepped out of his truck, leather folder under one arm, and started walking toward the stage. Rick, his lawyer, followed beside him, calm as ever, carrying a thermos of coffee and a manila envelope that might as well have been dynamite. Karen noticed them halfway through her speech and faltered for half a second before regaining her professional smile. That when good people come together, they can accomplish anything. Bill stopped a few feet away, waiting for the applause to die down. Then, in the kind of polite, even voice that carried farther than shouting, he said, "Even build a $12 million mall on land they don't own." The microphone picked it up perfectly. The crowd's laughter hesitated. The reporter nearest the stage tilted her camera slightly toward him. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" Bill held up the folder. "You built this," he said, gesturing around. "On Hartley farmland. Been in my family since 1974. Here's the deed. Stamped by the county last month. Congratulations. You just built me a mall." A murmur rolled through the audience. Rick handed a copy of the deed to the nearest county representative, who had been invited to cut the ribbon. The man looked at Bill, then at Karen. Mrs. Wilkins." Karen laughed. A brittle, high laugh that cracked halfway through. "This is absurd. The HOA has the legal right to develop community expansion property." Rick stepped forward. "Except this isn't community property. It's private land. The boundaries were never annexed. The title's valid, the taxes are current, and your development sits on it like frosting on somebody else's cake." A few cameras turned fully now. The news crew loved drama. Karen's PR smile wavered into something thinner. She tried to grab the microphone. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice tightening. "We have documentation." Bill nodded. "Oh, I bet you do. Wrong documentation, but I'm sure it's printed on really nice paper." The sheriff's deputy, whom Bill had quietly notified the day before, stepped closer to the podium. "Ma'am, until the county clears the ownership dispute, we're issuing a temporary closure order. You'll need to halt operations immediately." The silence that followed was cinematic. Somewhere in the back, someone dropped a balloon bouquet. Karen's face turned pink, then red. "This is harassment," she shouted, forgetting the microphone was still on. Her voice echoed over the loudspeakers, magnified and unflattering. "This man is lying." Bill smiled just enough for the cameras to catch it. "Ma'am, if I were lying, your mall wouldn't be sitting on my tax parcel." A few of the contractors standing by their trucks started whispering. One of them muttered, "Wait, he owns it?" The rumor spread like wildfire. By the time Karen was ushered off stage by two board members, half the crowd had their phones out recording. Rick leaned toward Bill. "You just broke the internet." Bill chuckled. "Didn't mean to, but I'll take it." Later that afternoon, every local news outlet ran a variation of the same headline. HOA mall built on wrong land, legal nightmare for Lakewood Meadows. The footage of Karen's shocked expression looped on the evening broadcast while Bill's calm explanation played beneath it. The public loved it, David versus Goliath, but Goliath wore pearls and carried a clipboard. Within hours, HOA emails leaked online. Angry residents demanded answers. One wrote, "You told us this project was approved. How could you build on private land?" Another, more bluntly, "Karen, you've destroyed our property values." By the next morning, the HOA board called an emergency session. Bill tuned in to the live stream from his laptop, sipping coffee like he was watching a particularly good sitcom. Karen sat at the head of the table, pale and defensive, surrounded by grim-looking board members. The treasurer read the agenda in a monotone voice. Item 1. Ongoing legal crisis. Karen launched into excuses. "It's a technicality. His land was adjacent, unzoned, practically abandoned." Rick joined the call briefly to correct her. "Abandoned land doesn't have current taxes paid in full. And it certainly doesn't have an owner sitting on your live stream right now." Every camera turned to Bill Square on the screen. He smiled politely. "Morning, everyone." The treasurer muttered, "Lord help us." That afternoon, the HOA issued a press release calling the issue a temporary boundary discrepancy. The internet tore them apart. Someone created a meme of Karen pointing at a blueprint with the caption, "Step 1, ignore property lines. Step 2, lose everything." Investors panicked. Contractors demanded payment before lawsuits froze their assets. By the second week, the HOA offices were swamped with reporters, lawyers, and angry homeowners waiving unpaid bills. Through it all, Bill said nothing publicly. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any speech. He just made copies of every headline, every official admission, every desperate email, and dropped them into his growing folder labeled Mall Fiasco. When Rick called to check in, Bill answered from his porch. "They're eating themselves alive," he said. Rick laughed. "You know, you could go for damages. You'd win easily." Bill shook his head. "I don't want damages. I want rent." "Rent?" "Sure. They built a mall on my land. I own the land, I own the mall. They can pay me market rate to stay." Rick whistled. "That's cold." "That's math," Bill said. By the following weekend, the HOA had gone from smug to scrambling. They held another special session that devolved into shouting. Karen tried to shift blame to the contractors. The contractors blamed the board, and one elderly resident stood up mid-meeting to shout, "We just wanted nice lawns." Bill watched the chaos unfold on live stream, feet up, bowl of popcorn in his lap. He decided to drop the final hammer the next morning. A polite, legally sound letter drafted by Rick, mailed directly to the HOA office. The subject line read, "Notice of Property Ownership and Tenancy Negotiation." It was worded like poetry. Clear, calm, and lethal. It informed the board that all businesses operating within the promenade were now tenants of Hartley Holdings, effective immediately, pending lease agreements. Rick added one final paragraph just for fun. Failure to remit rent within 30 days will result in standard eviction proceedings. The HOA meeting that followed was practically volcanic. Karen tried to quiet the shouting residents, but every word made it worse. "We're handling it," she insisted. A man stood up, waving a copy of the local newspaper. "You built an entire mall on the wrong man's property, Karen. How do you handle that?" She slammed her gavel so hard the handle snapped. "This meeting is adjourned." Bill nearly spit out his coffee laughing. Before turning off the live stream, he took a moment to address his invisible audience. The viewers, the neighbors, and, of course, the countless unseen listeners who loved poetic justice. "At this point," he said softly, "I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments, hit subscribe if you love poetic justice, and let's see how many of us have survived HOA brutality." Then, just like that, he turned back to the chaos on screen. Karen was red-faced, shouting off camera as board members argued over liability insurance. Rick texted him an hour later. "She's going to resign. It's only a matter of time." Bill replied, "Good. Maybe she'll take the flags with her." The headlines kept coming, funnier each time. HOA implodes over illegal mall build. Suburban tyranny meets land deed. Man legally owns shopping center built without permission. Even national outlets picked it up. People loved the irony. By the time the dust began to settle, one thing was clear. The empire of clipboards had finally met the power of paperwork. And somewhere between the lawsuits, resignations, and angry neighborhood gossip, Bill's quiet satisfaction felt complete. That night, he stood on his porch, the lights of the now empty mall flickering in the distance. He could almost hear the echo of Karen's voice in the silence. Self-assured, brittle, and gone. Then his phone buzzed with one last message from Rick. "Ready to file ownership claim officially?" Bill smiled, the soft kind of smile only patience earns. "Yeah," he said, setting his coffee down. "It's time to collect." The legal process unfolded like a slow-motion comedy that only Bill seemed to enjoy. The HOA scrambled to file motions, injunctions, and claims of community investment interest. But every move they made tangled them deeper in their own mess. Rick handled most of it, showing up to hearings with a binder so thick it could stop a bullet. Bill rarely needed to speak. The paperwork did it for him. Every document, every plat, every time-stamped photo of construction on his soil told a simple story. They built an empire on land they didn't own. The county judge, a man with the weary patience of someone who'd seen too many HOA disputes, summed it up perfectly during the first hearing. He leaned over the bench, squinting at the files before him. Let me get this straight. You, he pointed at Karen and the HOA board seated behind her, authorized construction of a commercial shopping center valued at over $12 million without confirming ownership of the parcel. Karen, visibly sweating under courtroom lighting, tried to smile. Your Honor, there was an assumption of annexation based on community need. An assumption, the judge repeated, unimpressed. You assumed you owned it? Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. It was believed. That's not how property law works, the judge interrupted flatly. Belief doesn't transfer title. Rick didn't need to add much. He slid the verified deed across the bench like a royal flush in poker. The judge's eyebrows rose. Well, he said, flipping through the pages. That's about as airtight as it gets. He looked directly at Karen. Ma'am, this man owns your mall. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen's composure cracked for the first time. She stammered. But the HOA funded the construction. Then I suggest, the judge said dryly, you start paying him rent. That one line made headlines the next morning. Judge to HOA. Pay the man who owns your mall. From that point forward, the narrative shifted entirely. Bill went from stubborn landowner to local legend. News crews parked near his driveway hoping for interviews. Neighbors who once ignored him now waved with a mix of awe and sheepishness. Even the barista from the cafe built on his land, who'd once told him to trim that ugly fence, offered him free coffee. Bill declined politely. You're already paying me rent, he said with a wink. Once the legal dust settled, Rick helped him form Hartley Holdings LLC, a modest shell company designed to manage his new real estate portfolio, though the portfolio consisted entirely of one shiny, HOA-funded mall. The businesses within it, boutiques, cafes, a gym, and a pet supply store, were now his tenants. Most were perfectly happy to sign leases under him. After all, he was fair. He didn't raise rates, didn't micromanage, and didn't care what color their signage was. His first rule to all tenants was simple. You pay on time, I stay out of your business. Word spread fast. Within a month, every shop had signed on. The only ones who refused were the 2 community offices that had been reserved for HOA operations. When their lease demand arrived in the mail, Karen apparently lost her composure in spectacular fashion. Rumor had it she threw her phone through a window. The HOA tried one last desperate move, an appeal claiming that the land's visual integration into the community created an implied jurisdiction. The judge dismissed it in 30 seconds. If visual integration transferred ownership, he said, then I'd own half the Starbucks I drive past. After that, the board went quiet. The HOA's reserves, drained by legal fees, couldn't cover the settlements demanded by construction companies and investors. The developers, realizing they'd built on private land, turned their fury toward Karen and her inner circle. One lawsuit snowballed into 6. By the end of the quarter, Lakewood Meadows HOA declared temporary financial restructuring, which was legal jargon for bankruptcy. Bill didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just carried on as usual, mowing his lawn, repairing his fence, feeding the birds. His revenge wasn't loud. It was long-lasting. Every morning, he'd sit on his porch with coffee and watch the parking lot fill with cars. He could hear the faint buzz of commerce, doors opening, voices echoing, the squeak of shopping carts. The mall was thriving, and every single tenant there now wrote their checks to him. Sometimes, customers would park too close to his property line and wander over to his fence, admiring the old barn or the open field behind it. They didn't know that the man sipping coffee on the porch was the one who legally owned everything on the other side of that fence. Bill preferred it that way. He liked his peace. One afternoon, the cafe owner, a young woman named Amelia, walked across the lot with 2 cups in hand. Mr. Hartley, she said shyly, these are on the house. For real this time. You saved my business. Bill smiled. Didn't save it. Just made sure you were paying the right landlord. She laughed. Still feels like justice. Justice, he thought, was a funny thing. It wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was just balance restoring itself quietly, one lease payment at a time. Karen's resignation came a month later. The HOA sent out an email to all residents. Effective immediately, President Karen Wilkins will be stepping down due to personal reasons. Everyone knew what that meant. A few days after that, a moving truck appeared outside her home. She left without saying goodbye. Bill watched from his porch as the truck pulled away, the sound of its tires fading into the distance. He raised his coffee cup slightly, almost like a toast. "Good riddance," he murmured. The irony wasn't lost on him. How a woman obsessed with property values had destroyed her own. Within months, the neighborhood she once ruled was fractured. Homeowners argued over new fees. Meetings turned hostile. Someone had even spray-painted "No more Karens" on the HOA office door before the bank repossessed it. Meanwhile, Bill's land, his original humble farmland, was now the most profitable real estate in the county. Rick calculated that his rental income from the mall exceeded what he'd earned in his last decade of surveying work. "You could retire again," Rick said. "I already did," Bill replied. "Now I just get paid for it." He used some of the earnings to restore the old barn and build a walking path along the tree line. A wooden sign marked the entrance. "Hartley Grounds, established 1974. Visitors thought it was just a decorative park feature, but to Bill it was a quiet statement of fact. Months later, during a local small business event, the county mayor stopped by his porch for a handshake and a photo. "You're a local hero, Mr. Hartley," the mayor said. "You stood up to overreach and won." Bill chuckled. "I didn't stand up to anything, Mayor. I just stood still and let them run into me." That night, after the lights dimmed and the event ended, Bill sat on his porch as the mall lights glowed across the field. He could hear laughter from the cafe, music from the gym, the soft rumble of delivery trucks. All the noise of progress, humming peacefully on land that finally had the right name on it. He thought back to his father, to those long afternoons spent learning how to read a map, how to find the truth in lines and numbers. His dad had always said, "People can lie, son, but land doesn't." Bill raised his cup to the sky. "You were right, Dad. It just waits until someone dumb enough forgets to check." He chuckled softly to himself, then leaned back in his chair. For the first time in months, he felt real peace. Not just the absence of noise, but the kind that comes when the world finally makes sense again. The next morning, he mowed his lawn for the first time since the ordeal started. Neighbors passing by waved, genuinely this time. Some even stopped to chat. "You showed her," one man said admiringly. "That was brilliant." Bill grinned. "I didn't show her anything. She showed herself." As he trimmed the last edge of grass, he looked toward the gleaming mall and couldn't help but laugh. There it stood, a monument to arrogance and the best investment he never made. He turned off the mower, wiped his forehead, and took a moment to admire the freshly cut rows. "Not bad," he said to himself, smiling. "I finally mowed the lawn," smiling this time. The hum of sprinklers returned in the distance, blending with faint laughter from the cafe. The air smelled of cut grass and roasted coffee. The scent of poetic justice served fresh. And for the first time in a long while, Bill felt exactly where he was meant to be. The months that followed felt like a slow exhale after a long storm. For the first time in years, the neighborhood grew quiet again. Not the kind of forced, rulebook quiet that Karen had loved, but the kind that came naturally, like a summer afternoon with the windows open and no one trying to prove anything. Bill noticed it first in the mornings. No more letters. No more drones buzzing over his barn. Just birds, sprinklers, and the gentle hum of life returning to normal. Lakewood Promenade, or as the new signage now proudly read, Hartley Plaza, had become a running joke in the county. People came from nearby towns to grab coffee at the cafe, built on stolen land, to take selfies by the fountain that had once been a symbol of HOA pride. The barista had even added a drink to the menu called the Deed, a black coffee with an extra shot. Strong enough to make you own the place. Bill didn't mind. He thought it was funny. He didn't gloat, though. Gloating wasn't his way. He'd seen what arrogance looked like when it dressed itself up as leadership, and he had no desire to wear the same outfit. He just enjoyed the simple rhythms. Rent checks coming in on time, the smell of soil after rain, the quiet knowledge that justice didn't need an audience to count. Every few weeks, someone new would stop by the porch. A neighbor, a journalist, sometimes even a college student writing a paper about community law gone wrong. They all wanted the same story, how he'd outsmarted the HOA. Bill always gave them the same answer. Wasn't smarts, was patience. He'd smile, sip his coffee, and add, patience and a copy of the county records office number. One Saturday, an older couple from 2 streets over came by. They'd lived under Karen's rule for years, fined for everything from wind chimes to mailbox paint. "You're a hero around here," the man said. "You did what we all wanted to do." Bill chuckled. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just read the fine print." The woman looked around at the peaceful field behind him, the newly painted barn, the soft glow of the mall lights in the distance. "Still," she said, "it's nice to see fairness win for once." Fairness. That word stuck with him after they left. Fairness wasn't about revenge, he realized. It was about restoration, the slow, steady correction of imbalance. The HOA had run on control and intimidation. His victory wasn't just his. It was a release valve for every person who'd ever been told to move their trash 3 inches to the left. As winter rolled in, the mall thrived under his ownership. Christmas lights twinkled across the storefronts, and local musicians played in the courtyard. It wasn't the sterile, committee-approved environment Karen had imagined. It was messy, human, alive. Families laughed, kids ran around the fountain, and no one cared if the garlands matched. Bill liked it that way. One evening, as he walked through the plaza, Amelia, the cafe owner, waved him over. "Mr. Hartley," she said, handing him a steaming cup. "First holiday latte of the season. On the house." He accepted it with a smile. "How's business?" "Booming," she said proudly. "People love the story. They say it feels good to shop somewhere that started with poetic justice." He nodded, amused. "Guess I'm in the justice business now." A teenager sitting nearby overheard and grinned. "You're that guy, right? The one who owned the land? Man, my dad talks about you every time he gets an HOA notice." Bill laughed. "Tell your dad to keep his paperwork. It's more powerful than a lawnmower." The kid laughed too, and Bill walked home with that rare, quiet pride that didn't need applause. The kind that comes from knowing something true and steady, like how lines on a map never lie. Winter turned to spring. The grass grew tall again. The air smelled of mulch and rain, and life kept rolling forward. Karen was long gone. Last anyone heard, she'd moved to Florida to work for a community management consultancy. Bill sometimes joked that meant she was teaching new Karens how not to read deeds. Rick, ever the practical one, kept urging him to sell. "You could cash out for millions," he said one afternoon over lunch. "Developers would line up for a property like this." Bill smiled. "And do what with it? Move into one of their boxes with the fake shutters." Rick shrugged. "Travel, maybe. You could buy a lake house." "I've got a lake," Bill said. "And a house." Rick raised his glass. "Can't argue with that." As spring settled in, the town invited Bill to speak at a local business forum. The flyer called it "A Lesson in Land and Logic." How one man outsmarted the HOA. Bill laughed so hard when he saw it that he nearly spilled his drink. "They make it sound like I was some kind of mastermind," he told Rick. "Honestly, you kind of were." When he stepped up to the microphone at the event, though, his speech wasn't what people expected. He didn't brag or scold. He told a simple story about patience, paperwork, and humility. "Everyone loves a revenge story," he said to the crowd. "But that's not what this was. This was about paying attention, about reading the lines instead of just following them. You don't need to yell to win. Sometimes you just need to know when not to move." The audience applauded, but Bill didn't bask in it. He ended with a smile and a quiet line that made people laugh and think all at once. "If your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine, remember, you can't control the petty, but you sure can outsmart it." Afterward, people came up to shake his hand, thank him, share their own stories. One woman said, "I was fined last year for having a flag on my porch. After hearing you, I went and checked my bylaws. Turns out they can't even do that. Bill grinned. See? You're already winning. Life rolled on with a calm rhythm. The seasons changed, the plaza prospered, and Bill's world stayed steady. His porch became a kind of neighborhood landmark, part local legend, part unofficial confessional for anyone tangled up in small-town nonsense. People dropped by with stories, questions, and coffee. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mall, casting long shadows across his field, Bill sat back in his chair and watched the lights flicker on one by one. He thought about his father again, about the simple lessons he'd learned from him. Keep your word, keep your paperwork, and don't start fights you can finish with a pen. He chuckled to himself, whispering, "Guess the old man was right." In the distance, he could hear laughter from the plaza. The cafe closing up, someone strumming a guitar, kids chasing each other near the fountain. The land that had once been a battleground was now a place people actually enjoyed. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. A breeze rolled across the porch, rustling the pages of an old newspaper beside him. The headline read, "Local landowner turns HOA mistake into legal triumph." He used it to steady his coffee cup and muttered, "That'll do." Car passed on the road. One of the HOA homeowners, one of Karen's old supporters, slowed down, rolled the window halfway, and waved. Bill raised his hand lazily in return. He couldn't help but notice the driver's other hand, one finger sticking up in the air. Bill laughed softly, shaking his head. Some things never change. He leaned back, letting the last light of the day fade into gold. The mall's neon signs flickered to life, reflecting off his old barn windows like faint constellations. It wasn't the view he'd grown up with, but it was his every inch of it. And as the crickets started up and the night folded in, he felt that quiet, full kind of peace that only comes when justice has already been served, when there's nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove. He took one last sip of coffee, smiled toward the glowing plaza, and said, mostly to himself, "Funny thing. They still wave when they drive by, usually with one finger." Then he laughed again, low, warm, and satisfied, the sound of a man who'd turned arrogance into income and pettiness into peace. The story of the mall that wasn't theirs but became his faded into legend, retold in living rooms, online threads, and backyard barbecues for years to come. And somewhere, in some future HOA meeting across America, someone would mention the Hartley case, and a few people would pause before sending that next petty letter. That, Bill figured, was the best kind of legacy. Not a lesson written in law books, but one whispered in the neighborhood air. Don't mess with the quiet guy who owns the land.